I pretended not to notice, but deep down I knew the truth.
Have you ever convinced yourself that everything was perfectly fine, even when the truth was staring you in the face, practically begging you to look closer? Laurel Whitaker pressed her palm against the cool granite countertop, her gaze fixed on the dim reflection in the kitchen window. Beyond the glass, dusk crept over the quiet suburban street, wrapping the rows of tidy brick houses in a soft blue haze. The glow of streetlights flickered, catching the edge of her husband's silhouette as Marcus stepped onto the porch, phone pressed tight to his ear. His voice was low, urgent, a tone he rarely used at home. Laurel's heart thudded in her chest, the steady rhythm a sharp counterpoint to the gentle hum of the dishwasher behind her. She watched as Marcus paced the length of the porch, his free hand moving in tense, staccato gestures. He glanced over his shoulder, catching her eye for a split second through the glass. She offered a quick, practiced smile, one she'd perfected in recent weeks. He turned away, phone still pressed to his ear, and disappeared into the shadowed corner of the yard. She didn't want to think about what that meant. Not tonight. Not after the day she'd had. Laurel forced herself to turn away from the window, pushing back the swirl of doubts that had settled in her chest like a stubborn fog. She moved through her kitchen, a space she prided herself on keeping spotless, straightening a stack of mail, wiping away a smear of peanut butter from the fridge handle, aligning a vase of fresh tulips just so. Every detail in her home was intentional, a silent promise to herself that order could be created even when the rest of life felt uncertain. The Whitaker home sat on a peaceful cul-de-sac in the heart of suburban Atlanta, Georgia. The neighborhood was the kind featured in real estate brochures, maple-lined streets, driveways dotted with tricycles and minivans, neighbors who waved from across their lawns. On weekends, the faint scent of barbecue drifted through the air, mingling with laughter and the distant bark of a dog. Laurel loved the predictability of it all. The familiar faces, the routines, the sense that life here was safe and knowable. Her days followed an unspoken rhythm. She rose early before the noise of the world crept in, savoring the quiet as she brewed coffee and scrolled through her to-do list. She loaded Owen's lunchbox, checked his homework, and listened patiently as he rattled off the day's anxieties, science tests, soccer tryouts, the unfairness of broccoli in the cafeteria. She walked him to the bus stop, waving as the yellow doors folded shut and the bus rumbled away. Then, her favorite part of the morning, the walk with Renee Calloway. Renee lived 3 houses down, a whirlwind of energy with a laugh that carried over fences. Their friendship was forged in the early days of motherhood, shared cups of coffee, whispered confessions about sleepless nights and irrational worries, the quiet reassurance that they weren't alone. Every morning they circled the block, sneakers crunching over gravel, talking about everything from PTA drama to dreams they still harbored. That morning, the air had been heavy with impending rain. Clouds pressed low over the rooftops, and the scent of wet pavement lingered. Renee met Laurel at her mailbox, her auburn curls pulled back in a messy ponytail, a reusable coffee cup in hand. "Sleep last night?" Renee asked, her tone casual but her eyes sharp. Laurel hesitated. On and off. Marcus had another late call. Renee frowned. "That's the 3rd this week, isn't it?" Laurel forced a small laugh. "He's been busy. End of the quarter." Renee shook her head. "He's always busy. But you don't usually look so—" She stopped herself, searching Laurel's face. "You okay?" Laurel offered a practiced smile. "Just tired. You know how it is." They walked in companionable silence, broken only by the distant rumble of thunder and the rhythmic slap of their sneakers. Laurel found comfort in Renee's presence, the easy way she filled the spaces with stories about her twins, her job at the library, her latest attempt at yoga. By the time they circled back to Laurel's driveway, the weight in her chest felt lighter, at least for a moment. Back inside, the day unfolded in its usual pattern. Laundry sorted and folded, grocery lists scribbled on the back of envelopes, a midday check-in with Mrs. Rosario, the elderly neighbor who lived alone next door. Mrs. Rosario always greeted her with a warm smile and a plate of homemade cookies, her hands spotted with age but as gentle as ever. They chatted about the weather, the neighborhood, the squirrels that had taken to digging up Mrs. Rosario's flower beds. "I see your husband comes home late these days," Mrs. Rosario remarked, her tone light but her eyes searching. Laurel shrugged, careful to keep her voice steady. "He's got a lot on his plate at work. It'll pass." Mrs. Rosario nodded, not pressing further, but Laurel felt the scrutiny linger long after she'd left. By late afternoon, the house was filled with the bustle of Owen returning from school, his backpack thudding to the floor, his voice carrying through the hall. "Mom, can I have a snack? And did you sign my field trip form?" Laurel smiled, grateful for the distraction. "Snack first, homework second, then we'll talk about the field trip." Owen grinned, his brown eyes sparkling with mischief, and darted toward the pantry. Laurel watched him, reminded of how quickly the years had passed, how the worries of motherhood had shifted from midnight feedings to homework battles and preteen drama. Marcus arrived home just after 6, the same time as always. He kissed Laurel on the cheek, his lips cold from the outside air. He set his briefcase down, loosened his tie, and asked about Owen's day. But there was a distance in his eyes, a faraway look that hadn't been there before. He lingered over dinner, but his phone buzzed constantly, screen lighting up with messages he never quite explained. "Work again?" Laurel asked, trying to keep her tone light. Marcus glanced at his phone, thumb hovering over the screen. "Yeah, sorry, it's just busy." She nodded, swallowing her questions. She wanted to believe him. She needed to believe him. Later, as she loaded the dishwasher and wiped crumbs from the counter, she caught sight of Marcus slipping onto the porch, phone pressed to his ear. The same posture, the same low, urgent voice. Something inside her twisted, a thread of anxiety pulled tight. She tried to dismiss it, told herself it was nothing, that she was being silly, paranoid. After all, Marcus had always been a good husband, a hard worker, a loving father, steady and reliable. She had no real reason to doubt him. Yet the signs were there, subtle but persistent. The late nights, the missed calls, the cryptic texts with no clear explanation, the way he'd forgotten their anniversary last month, a date he'd never missed before, the receipts she found stuffed in his jacket pocket from restaurants she'd never heard of. At hours he was supposed to be working late. Laurel told herself not to snoop. That trust was the foundation of marriage. But the suspicion crept in, uninvited, coloring every conversation, every gesture, every silence. She confided in Renee over coffee the next morning, the words tumbling out before she could stop them. "Do you ever get the feeling that something's off?" Laurel asked, her fingers wrapped tight around her mug. Renee studied her, concern etched across her face. "With Marcus?" Laurel nodded, unable to meet her friend's eyes. "He's been different, distant. I keep telling myself it's just stress, but you don't believe it," Renee finished gently. Laurel shook her head, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know what to believe." Renee reached across the table, squeezing her hand. "Maybe you should talk to him. Really talk. You deserve to know the truth." Laurel smiled weakly, the gesture not quite reaching her eyes. "I'm not sure I'm ready to hear it." The day pressed on. Laurel kept herself busy, organizing closets, baking muffins for Owen's class, checking in on Mrs. Rosario. She clung to her routines like a lifeline, hoping the familiar tasks would quiet the turmoil inside her. But as evening fell and the house settled into its nighttime hush, the doubts returned, louder than ever. Laurel found herself staring at Marcus's phone, abandoned on the kitchen counter. It vibrated, lighting up with a new message, just a flash of a name she didn't recognize before it faded. She drew a shaky breath, her reflection wavering in the dark glass of the window. Outside, the world was quiet, the streetlights casting long shadows across the lawn. In the distance, she could hear the faint sound of a train, its whistle cutting through the stillness. She pressed her hand to her chest, feeling the steady thump of her heart. Was she imagining things? Was she reading too much into the small, ordinary lapses of daily life? Or was the truth already there, plain as day, waiting for her to finally acknowledge it? As she turned off the kitchen lights and climbed the stairs to bed, Laurel couldn't shake the question echoing in her mind. Was I paranoid, or did I already know? Laurel woke before the alarm, heart already restless in her chest. The sky outside was still a pale, uncertain gray, but the neighborhood was stirring. Delivery trucks humming down the street, a dog barking somewhere, the distant grind of a school bus's brakes. She moved through her morning routine with measured care, every motion deliberate as if she could keep her thoughts in order by folding towels and measuring coffee grounds just so. Marcus was gone by the time she came downstairs. His car was missing from the driveway, the travel mug she'd bought for him last Father's Day rinsed and left on the drying rack. Laurel found herself lingering over the mug, running a thumb along the faded "World's Best Dad" lettering. He'd been leaving earlier lately, citing early meetings, but he never woke her to say goodbye anymore. Owen crashed into the kitchen, his backpack barely zipped, hair a wild mess. "Did Dad leave already?" he asked, grabbing a banana from the fruit bowl. "Yeah, sweetheart, he had to be in Marietta by 7, Laurel replied, forcing a smile. She tousled his hair, but Owen ducked away, a little less playful than usual. He eyed her, then the empty mug, then mumbled, "He's been working a lot." Laurel's breath caught. She watched Owen gulp down breakfast, shoulders hunched, and wondered how much he understood. She wanted to reassure him, but the words stuck. "He's just busy, honey. It'll calm down soon." Owen nodded, unconvinced. He zipped his jacket, slung his bag over his shoulder, and paused at the door. "You'll walk with Mrs. Calloway today, right?" "Of course. I'll see you after school," she said, waving as he disappeared onto the porch. The house felt cavernous after Owen left, every tick of the clock echoing. Laurel wiped down the counters and loaded the dishwasher, but her mind kept circling the same questions, like a moth trapped inside a glass. At precisely 9, as always, Renee Calloway's text pinged. "Ready for a walk, neighbor? Coffee after." Laurel smiled despite herself. She slipped on her sneakers and met Renee at the curb. The two women fell into step, the quiet rhythm of their sneakers on the sidewalk oddly soothing. Renee wore her usual cheerful pink windbreaker, curly hair pulled into a high puff. She shot Laurel a sidelong glance, lips pursed. "You look like you didn't sleep a wink." Laurel hesitated, then shrugged. Marcus has been so distracted lately. He's barely home before 8, and when he is, he's glued to his phone. Last night he took a call outside. Said it was work, but..." She trailed off, embarrassed by her own uncertainty. Renee's brows knitted together. "You two always seemed rock solid. But Laurel, if something feels off, you should talk to him. Don't let it eat you up." "I know," Laurel murmured. They passed Mrs. Rosario's house, her porch crowded with potted plants and wind chimes. I don't want to accuse him of something unfair. What if it's nothing?" Renee stopped, placing a warm hand on Laurel's arm. "Or what if you're right, and you let it fester until it's worse? Trust your instincts, girl. You're not crazy." Laurel looked away, guilt prickling beneath her skin. She wanted to trust Marcus, but each day brought something else, a new inconsistency, a new reason to doubt. After their walk, the two women sat at Laurel's kitchen table, mugs of coffee steaming between them. Laurel recounted the little things, the unfamiliar receipts she'd found in the laundry, the late-night texts, the way Marcus had forgotten their anniversary dinner plans last week, something he'd never done before. Renee listened intently, nodding at all the right moments. "Have you checked the receipts? Maybe it's just work lunches?" Laurel pulled one from her purse, smoothing the crumpled paper. "This one's from a place in Buckhead. He said he was in Sandy Springs that day." Renee's brows shot up. "Maybe he stopped on the way home?" "Maybe," Laurel echoed, folding the receipt again. But the explanation felt thin. They were interrupted by a gentle knock at the back door. Mrs. Rosario, bundled in a floral cardigan, smiled in, holding a basket of ripe tomatoes. "I have too many from my garden. You girls want some?" "Of course, Mrs. Rosario, come in," Laurel said, grateful for the diversion. The older woman set the basket down and eyed Laurel with grandmotherly concern. "You look tired, dear." "Just a lot on my mind," Laurel replied. "Well, if you want to keep busy, my petunias need replanting, and these old hands aren't what they used to be," Mrs. Rosario said, winking. Laurel smiled, warmth blooming in her chest. "I'd love to help. I'll come by after lunch." Renee squeezed her hand under the table. "That'll be good for you." Yet even as Laurel later knelt in Mrs. Rosario's garden, digging her fingers in the earth, her worries trailed her. The sharp scent of tomato vines and the buzz of bees couldn't drown out the memory of Marcus's distracted tone, or the way he'd snapped when she'd asked about his day. By the time she returned home, the sky was heavy with gray clouds. Laurel sat at the kitchen table, the house silent except for the faint tick of the clock. She pulled out her phone and scrolled through old photos. Marcus grinning at a barbecue, Owen's muddy soccer cleats, all of them laughing under the summer sun. She wanted to believe nothing had changed. Her phone buzzed, a text from Marcus. "Running late. Don't wait up for dinner." Laurel stared at the message, then at the clock. It was already 6:30. She felt a familiar ache settle in her chest. She reheated leftovers for Owen, who ate quietly, pushing peas around his plate. "Is Dad mad at you?" Owen asked suddenly, eyes wide. Laurel's hand froze on her fork. "No, honey. Why would you think that?" He's different. He doesn't joke around anymore. Yesterday he didn't even say goodnight." Laurel swallowed, reaching over to brush his hair back. "Sometimes grown-ups get busy and tired. But it's not your fault, okay?" Owen nodded, but his frown lingered. After dinner, Laurel tucked him in, reading 2 chapters of his favorite book, her voice steady even as her mind wandered. Later, alone in the living room, Laurel stared at the family photos on the wall. The 3 of them at the beach, smiling and sunburned. She wondered when things had shifted. Was it gradual, or had she simply refused to see it? Marcus came home close to midnight, moving quietly through the dark. Laurel, pretending to sleep, listened as he showered and climbed into bed without a word. The next morning, she found another receipt in his jacket pocket, this one from a gas station on the far side of town. She traced the address with her finger, trying to remember if he'd mentioned being there. Her heart hammered against her ribs. She carried the receipt into the kitchen, where Renee sat waiting, sipping coffee. "I found another one," Laurel whispered, sliding the receipt across the table. Renee read it, then looked up, concern etched deep in her face. "Laurel, this isn't nothing. You need to talk to him." Tears pricked at Laurel's eyes. What if talking makes it worse? What if I lose everything? Renee reached for her hand. Pretending not to notice won't make the truth go away. Trust yourself. You deserve honesty. Laurel nodded, but her hands trembled. She glanced at Marcus's phone lying on the counter, buzzing with a new message. Her mind raced. Should she look? Should she confront him? The uncertainty gnawed at her, but so did the fear of what she might find. If you've ever been in that place, where your gut tells you something's wrong but your heart wants to believe otherwise, know that you're not alone. Laurel's journey is only just beginning, and sometimes the hardest part is facing what we already know deep down. If you want to see what choice Laurel makes next, make sure to subscribe and follow her story. This isn't just her journey, it's a story about trusting yourself, even when it's hard. Hit that subscribe button so you don't miss what happens next. Laurel awoke before dawn, tangled in bed sheets damp with sweat. The air in the bedroom was thick, June in Georgia, even with the ceiling fan spinning overhead. She lay perfectly still, listening. Marcus's breathing was steady beside her. He hadn't stirred when she slipped into bed hours ago, long after he'd come home from his late meeting. She'd waited for him in the living room, the TV on low, pretending to be engrossed in a home renovation show, while her mind replayed every odd glance, every muffled laugh she'd overheard on his phone over the past weeks. Now, in the earliest hours, the house was silent. Only the faint chirp of crickets drifted through the partially open window. Laurel pressed her fingertips to her temples and tried to will the anxiety away, but it pulsed in her like a warning bell. Downstairs, coffee brewed with its familiar comfort, but she barely tasted it. Owen's footsteps thundered overhead, the floorboards creaking as he got ready for school. She heard him pause outside the master bedroom, then continue onto the bathroom. Marcus's phone, left charging on the kitchen island, vibrated softly. Laurel froze, mug halfway to her lips. The screen lit up, just for a second. A message from RT. She felt a tightness in her chest, a sensation both hot and cold. She set the mug down, hands trembling. The moment she'd spent weeks dreading was right in front of her. She glanced toward the stairs. Owen was still in the shower. Marcus, she could hear his heavy footsteps approaching. In a single, almost automatic movement, Laurel picked up the phone and slid her thumb across the screen. The passcode. She knew it. She'd seen him punch it in hundreds of times. The year Owen was born. She tapped it in. The phone unlocked. Laurel's hands shook so badly she nearly dropped it. The Messages app opened to a long thread. RT. The most recent message glowed at the bottom. Need to confirm 10:30 a.m. for the call. Let me know. RT. Laurel scrolled up. There were dozens of messages, most of them brief but businesslike. Congrats again on the numbers. Don't stress about the presentation, you're more than ready. Let's keep this between us for now. HR will announce soon. Her mind raced. She kept scrolling, her thumb catching on a message with a little smiley face at the end. Her stomach turned. She looked up, suddenly aware of footsteps on the stairs. Marcus appeared in the doorway, still in pajama pants but already pulling on a dress shirt. He froze at the sight of her with his phone in hand. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Laurel's lips parted, but nothing came out. Marcus's eyes flickered from her face to the phone, a look of alarm crossing his features. Laurel, what are you? She summoned all her courage. Her voice was barely above a whisper. Who is RT, Marcus? He hesitated, and the pause felt like a chasm opening between them. She's just someone from work. Just someone from work? Her voice rose, cracking with the strain. You've been texting her at all hours. Sneaking out for calls, lying to me about where you're going at night. Marcus, I'm not stupid. I know something's going on. He ran a hand through his hair, exhaling shakily. Laurel, please. Laurel's breath came in short, uneven bursts. Tears pricked at her eyes, but she blinked them away furiously. I see the receipts, the missed dinners. You don't look at me the same way anymore. Owen can tell something's wrong. I can't keep pretending everything is fine. Her voice broke, and she clutched the phone so tightly her knuckles went white. Marcus's face softened, and for the first time in weeks, he really looked at her. Not over her shoulder, not past her, but at her. Laurel, listen to me, please. He took a step closer, his hands raised in a gentle, pleading gesture. RT is Renee Turner. She's my new regional director, the boss I told you about. Laurel blinked, confusion warring with anger. Renee Turner? He nodded. I've been interviewing for the senior manager position. It's been weeks of calls, extra reports, training sessions. I didn't want to say anything until it was official. I didn't want to get your hopes up. Things have been tight, and His voice faltered. I was afraid if I didn't get it, I'd just look like a failure. Laurel stared at him, her breath coming fast. The room seemed to tilt. So all of this, all the secrets, were about a promotion? A flush crept up Marcus's cheeks. Yes. I know it looks bad. I should have told you. I didn't want to let you down. I wanted to surprise you. I know how hard things have been, and I thought if I could just make this happen. Laurel's anger began to dissolve, replaced by a different ache, relief mingled with humiliation, and a dawning guilt that stung. She looked down at the phone, the messages now taking on a different light. She saw Marcus's familiar awkwardness in the businesslike exchanges, the anxiety behind his late nights and distracted silences. A new wave of tears threatened, but this time she didn't fight them. "Marcus, why didn't you just tell me?" Her voice was small. "I thought—" She swallowed, unable to finish the sentence. He crossed the space between them and took her hand. "I should have. I was scared. I didn't want you to worry, and I didn't want Owen picking up on my stress." He squeezed her fingers, his own trembling. "I never meant for you to feel shut out. I never meant for you to doubt me." For a long moment they just stood there, Laurel's heart hammering, the morning sun beginning to spill through the kitchen window, casting long shadows across the floor. A bird chirped outside, impossibly bright and out of place in the heavy silence. Finally, Laurel let out a breath she felt she'd been holding for weeks. "I was so sure I knew what was happening," she whispered. "I let it eat away at me. I almost convinced myself of the worst." Marcus's eyes shone, and he wrapped his arms around her, holding her tightly. "I'm sorry. For everything." They stood that way until Owen clattered down the stairs, backpack bouncing against his side. His eyes flicked from Laurel to Marcus, uncertain. "Is everything okay?" Laurel managed a watery smile. "Yeah, buddy. Everything's going to be okay." Marcus ruffled Owen's hair, something like relief flickering across his face. "Let's get breakfast, champ." As Marcus and Owen disappeared into the living room, Laurel lingered in the kitchen, the phone still in her hand. She glanced out the window, where the morning light bathed the yard in gold. Across the street, Renee Calloway waved as she loaded groceries into her car. Laurel's stomach fluttered. She'd have to explain everything to her friend, apologize for her coldness and distance. The truth sat heavy in her chest, but it was a clean weight. Real, not imagined. For weeks, she'd pretended not to notice the cracks forming in her carefully built world. She'd been afraid to look closely, afraid of what she might find. But now, standing in the kitchen with the last traces of suspicion fading, she realized something she'd known all along. Sometimes, pretending not to notice only makes the truth harder when it finally comes out. She set the phone down, her hands still trembling, but this time not from fear. From relief and from hope. Fragile, but growing stronger with the light of day. Laurel awoke to the soft rays of sunlight filtering through the half-closed blinds. For the first time in weeks, she hadn't dreamt of Marcus's distant glances or the silent tension that seemed to fill every corner of their neatly kept Atlanta home. Instead, she felt an odd sense of both exhaustion and relief. A weight had shifted, though she wasn't yet sure where it had settled. The night before replayed in her mind, every word and pause vivid. Marcus's confession, his secret job interviews, the pressure of a potential promotion, his fear of disappointing her, still echoed inside her. She'd expected heartbreak, but instead she'd found something else. The raw, almost awkward honesty that comes only when you stop pretending and finally look the truth in the eye. She padded quietly down the hallway, past Owen's room where soft snoring floated from beneath a pile of comic books and tangled blankets. In the kitchen, Marcus sat at the table, elbows propped on the wood, coffee untouched. He looked up as she entered, a nervous half-smile on his lips. "Hey," he said, voice tentative. Laurel poured herself a cup of coffee and sat across from him. For a moment, neither spoke. The silence was different now. No longer a wall, but a space waiting to be filled. "I'm sorry," Marcus said, breaking the quiet. "I should have told you sooner. I didn't want to burden you if it fell through. Things have been tight lately, and I thought—" He stopped, searching her face for forgiveness or maybe just understanding. Laurel studied him, noticing the lines on his forehead she'd ignored for too long, the nervous tap of his wedding ring against the table. She realized then how much she'd missed him, the real him, not the ghost she'd created in her fears. "I get it," she said finally. She reached across the table, her fingers brushing his knuckles. "But you don't have to protect me from disappointment, Marcus." We're supposed to do this together, right? The good and the bad. He nodded, a tightness in his shoulders easing. I know. I just didn't want to let you down. Laurel smiled, tears prickling at the corners of her eyes. You never have. But I let myself down by not trusting us enough to ask what was really going on. They sat in companionable silence, the morning slowly unfurling around them. The air felt clearer, the kitchen warmer. It wasn't perfect, but it was honest. The day moved gently forward. Owen wandered in, rubbing sleep from his eyes, and accepted a plate of toast. He glanced between his parents, sensing something had changed. Is everything okay? He asked, voice small. Laurel crouched beside him, smoothing his hair. Yeah, buddy. We should have talked to you sooner, too. She glanced at Marcus, who nodded encouragement. Dad's been working on something big, and he was worried about telling us before he was sure. Owen considered this, then grinned. Are we moving? Do I have to switch schools? Marcus laughed, the tension finally breaking. No moves, just maybe some new challenges at work for me, but nothing changes here at home. Owen seemed satisfied, wolfing down his breakfast. Laurel felt a gentle pride at how resilient he was, how easily children forgive what adults complicate. Later that afternoon, Laurel walked across the street to Renee's house, heart pounding. She hadn't called ahead, a spontaneous act she hadn't dared in weeks. Renee answered the door in yoga pants, hair pulled back, a half-empty mug of tea in her hand. Laurel, I was just about to text you. Everything okay? Laurel hesitated, then nodded. Can we talk? They settled on the porch, the Georgia sun warming their backs. Laurel explained what had happened, the late nights, her suspicions, the messages from RT. She described the confrontation with Marcus, his explanation, and the relief she felt, tinged with guilt. Renee listened, her brow furrowing in concern, then softening as the truth spilled out. Laurel, I had no idea. I've heard Marcus mention his new boss, but I never connected the dots. I'm so sorry if I made things worse by pushing you to talk to him. Laurel shook her head. You didn't. If anything, I should have trusted myself, and you, sooner. I let my fears get the best of me. Renee reached over, squeezing Laurel's hand. We all do sometimes. That's what friends are for, to remind each other we don't have to face things alone. They laughed, the tension melting away, replaced by the easy camaraderie that had defined their friendship for years. For the first time in a long while, Laurel felt like herself again. Lighter, braver, more open. The days that followed were quieter, but richer somehow. Laurel found herself noticing things she'd overlooked before. The way Marcus hummed when he folded the laundry, Owen's off-key singing in the shower, the neighbor's tabby cat sunning itself on the front walk. She volunteered to help Mrs. Rosario with her garden, losing herself in the smell of earth and the simple satisfaction of pulling weeds. One afternoon, as she clipped rosemary in Mrs. Rosario's backyard, the older woman glanced up from her own work. You look lighter, Laurel. Did the sun finally come out for you? Laurel smiled, surprised by the observation. I think it did. Or maybe I just stopped pretending the clouds weren't there. Mrs. Rosario nodded sagely. The truth has a way of finding us, whether we're ready or not. But facing it, now, that's the real strength. Laurel carried those words with her. She realized that for so long she'd confused pretending everything was fine with actually being okay. She'd thought ignoring her doubts would keep her family safe, but all it had done was build walls between them. She started new habits, small, intentional changes. She and Marcus began setting aside a few minutes each night to talk, really talk, not just about work or the grocery list, but about their worries, hopes, and what they needed from each other. Owen, seeing the shift, started sharing more about his day, his friends, his dreams of making the school basketball team. One evening, after dinner, Laurel found herself standing at the same kitchen window where her worries had first taken root. This time, she wasn't watching Marcus with suspicion, but with gratitude as he chased Owen around the backyard, both of them laughing in the golden light. She realized she'd grown, not by becoming fearless, but by learning to face her fears head-on, to ask hard questions, and to trust herself and those she loved enough to hear the answers. As dusk settled over the neighborhood, Laurel stepped outside, breathing in the crisp air. She waved to Mrs. Rosario on her porch, then called out to Renee across the street, inviting her over for coffee the next morning. Life wasn't suddenly perfect, but it was honest. And that was enough. Before heading back inside, Laurel paused, looking up at the stars just beginning to peek through the twilight. She thought of everyone who'd ever felt that gnawing doubt, that urge to pretend not to notice because the truth seemed too heavy to carry alone. If you're watching this and you've ever felt that way, if you've ever kept quiet out of fear, or convinced yourself everything was fine just to keep the peace, you're not alone. Sometimes, the bravest thing you can do is admit what you already know and let the truth in. And if Laurel's story reminded you of a moment in your own life, I'd love to hear about it in the comments. Was there a time you pretended not to notice, only to realize the truth was right there all along? Share your thoughts below. I read every single one. If this story moved you, please give it a like. It lets me know these stories matter. And don't forget to subscribe and ring the bell so you never miss another chapter from the heart of everyday life. Sometimes the biggest changes start with the smallest choices, like telling the truth or just listening a little closer. Thank you for being here. Until next time, take care of your heart and those you love.